Hi once again, this is Eyisegun, and I just finished a series on the importance of sharing Christ early. Um, and my last broadcast was supposed to be the last of that series, but since then, just a few things came to me. Now, it's easy to talk about our lives within the context of Satan's plan and God's plan, or Satan's agenda and God's plan for our lives, or God's purpose for our lives, rather, that's going to be executed through a plan, a working plan. And to 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 say that those things aren't true, to say that God doesn't have a plan and Satan doesn't have an agenda, or God doesn't have a purpose and Satan has an agenda, will be disingenuous of me. And but it's important that I just highlight a few points, um, because Satan's plan doesn't work in isolation. Satan's agenda rather doesn't work in isolation of human of human intervention. Now, there are times when things just happen and it's completely out of your hands. So Jesus was born, Moses was born, it wasn't anyone's fault. And Satan still had an agenda of his own, which he tried to execute through the Herod, the kings of that time. But there are things that do happen that lead people a certain way. Uh, and I would really want to speak to parents. Because sometimes there's an open door, for the enemy to come in. And one of those open doors is lack of proper relationship, parent-child relationship. When all these things were happening to me, I couldn't approach my parents, even from the earliest, when I was getting, harassed, so to speak, at the various stages of my life. I couldn't tell my parents. And the reason why I didn't tell my parents was because we didn't have that kind of relationship where you could say things. My parents were like parents, and they were like gods to me. So, my job was to go to school, do my homework and my house chores, and I suppose that's as far as it went. So, not having that relationship as a buffer, and not having anywhere to sound things off, I internalized a lot of things, and then that led to other complications. The other thing sometimes is, parents, you need to, as busy as you are, with your careers and any other activities you're engaged in, you need to pay attention to your children, so that when things are happening or beginning to happen, you can get on top of it very early. And now this is where the parent-child relationship comes into play. Um, it, as a parent, you've got to create an environment for your children to be open with you and to talk to you about things that might be happening with them. If you don't do that, then they're not going to say much, and they're going to internalize a lot of things and start acting up, and you won't know what's happening. And so that's very important, that the parent-child relationship, from the beginning of a child's life, is very important that it's handled, managed very properly, and that relationship is actually introduced. It's not enough to hand down values and morals and all those things, which are good, but children need to be able to relate. And also, if some of those things that were happening with me were things I could bring to my parents, I suppose they would have been addressed. That's for starters. And the other thing also is that maybe some of the things that I would not have encountered them. You know, a lot of my behavior at that time came from the things that I had to put up with, which I just sort of kicked against, and I thought, that's it, I've had enough now. I also found no protection in the school. I remember when I went to complain to my teacher once about certain things that were happening, and I think she said to me I was to be seen and not heard. Um, and that had an impact on me. Another thing that had an impact on me was when I had this situation with the teacher. Um, I didn't get any sense that the teacher was reprimanded. I didn't get any sense. I didn't even get any sense of justification. I didn't seem to. There seemed the principal just laughed, and I remember it was like, "Ah, you're an English child," that sort of thing, and just laughed it off, and then I was sent back to class. Um, it didn't seem to me that there was anybody who was so willing to look at the situation and say, actually, okay, we understand why you did this, we don't agree with it, but you were right to stand up and say no or whatever. Now, I know that in the community where this happened, that's not how it runs. It's not like in some countries where you can actually get up and say something, and you can actually get teachers who will fight your corner if there is a case, or somebody within the school system. So it didn't really help matters, you know. Um, it didn't really help matters. But again, it goes back to the fact that if I had good parenting relationships, and this is not to criticize my parents, or this is not to make them out to be bad parents, because they're not bad parents or bad people. I'm just sort of saying that there was no relationship that would enable me bring these sort of issues to the table. And so, a whole lot of things went on. I was frustrated and very unhappy, and they were very frustrated and happy because they didn't understand what was happening to their child. I think I'm older now and I can look back and I understood what was going on, but at the time, even I didn't understand what was going on, and I hadn't quite fully made the link between certain things that I'd had to put up with and my resulting behavior. Um, and so uh, you begin to see how important it is that you observe your children, build relationship with your children. Uh, yes, you're a parent, and I'm not saying be pals with them and go night clubbing, but there's got to be a degree of openness and friendship where your children, and an appropriate level of friendship, that doesn't decimate the parental line, or boundary, where your children can actually come to you and say things. And you're not going to half kill them, but you're just going to listen to them and take the things they say seriously, you know. And that's quite important, because the lack of those things you might just be opening a door wide open uh, for the devil, so to speak, to fulfill an agenda, and before you know it, one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. I talked about the fact that somebody told and shared Christ with us, but to a group of us, and in that group, I think one of them died before the age of 21, and in that group, another guy, he died of a drugs overdose, and you know, and you know, it, lifestyle issues, and people went off in different directions, and it was a bit crazy for a while, you know. Um, but sometimes our problems stem from not lack of proper relationship with our parents in the first instance, so that when things are happening, we've got nowhere to go with those things, and we respond to those situations consciously or subconsciously, the way we know how. For some it's very positive, for some it's very negative. I just happened to be very fortunate that uh, God was with me. That's not to say there wasn't a lot of damage. There was, but I'm still one of the fortunate ones. And so, parents, to really build relationships with your children, and create an environment where your children can come to you and talk to you about things that bother them or things that are happening to them. If you have children who are quiet, who aren't talking, but you notice changes, watch them and study them and try and find out if anything's going on, because you just might be surprised, how much is going on in a child's life that you might never get to hear. And so that's important. And the other thing also is that, uh, if children are going to learn about Christ, thank God for the church and thank God for Sunday schools and all of those things. But the place they need to hear about him is in the home. In the home, it's the parents. It's your job, to introduce your child, to Christ. And I'm assuming that you're a Christian, of course. Um, Assuming you are Christians, it's your job to introduce Christ. And I sometimes think, I was very young when a lot of these things began to happen to me. Now, Satan has an agenda regardless of whether you know Christ or not. So I'm not going to make out like as soon as you know Christ, everything's hunky-dory. No, it may not be the case. But proper relationship, early awareness of Christ and all, and His sacrifice and all of those things may just minimize some of your exposure to some nonsense, and so that's why that's important. Um, Sunday school is a wonderful thing, but it's not a substitute for the priests in the house, and we need to just recognize and take that on board. I'm cognizant of the fact that we are very busy in our lives, and the demands of life can really choke up our time. But when the job is over and you've retired, and the business is over and you're not doing it anymore, and anything else you might be engaged in, you will always have your children, and you want to be able to look at your children in the future and be happy about how they've lived their lives and how they've turned out, which is not the case for a lot of parents. I remember one of my friends who passed away very early, and he was a troublesome child, and his mom saw me, and the first thing she said was, "So and so has finally died," and all I could read was relief, no sadness, but just like, that's done, he's gone, case closed, and no more drama, and that response stayed with me till this day. And it's not a pleasant one to get to a point where people are just relieved that you've passed away. More so your parents, especially a mother, who in emotional terms would say, "I carried you for 9 months." So things, I know things got pretty dire with this particular individual, and I know others like that, who, I've got to say this, that when I was young, and going through this whole drama, one of the good things that came out of this is that I got to meet a lot of people who at the heart of it were decent people, but were acting up because there were issues that were not resolved in the home. I remember a particular guy. He was a very, very lovely guy, and in fact, he was the guy that I was closest to in those days, in those heady days. And, he was a lovely guy, and he had other siblings, and, he was acting up and all of that stuff. And the father felt that, he didn't need to bother about him because he had other sons that were being successful and doing well. Now, I'm not putting words in the man's mouth, but these are the things that the man said to my face, that he has other children who are doing well. So this one, he was disposable, really. He didn't really care. And as a parent, you need to care about your children. You need to find out what's going on with them, know them, understand them, and not just sort of dash them away because you've got 4 other children who are doing well. This particular boy died around the age of 24. And what had happened is that, along with some of the other guys that we used to roll with, he used to hang out. I left my home country. I went abroad, and this particular guy, he continued to hang out with those other chaps that I mentioned earlier, and some of them used to go and rob. They used to go into robbery at night, and that sort of stuff. And he wasn't of that disposition, but he hung out with them because we lived in the same neighborhood, some of us, not all of us, and some of us went to the same schools, and some of us, we were just neighborhood kids basically. And they went out one night, and they went out on a raid, and they got caught. And because he was a friend of theirs, he didn't go out on the road. They went to his house and picked him up, and he was judged to be guilty by association. And now, when I use the word judge, I'm not saying that they went before a court of law. They never did. But he was locked up in a prison in a police station for a very long time, and he began to fall ill. And in those days, you could be locked up and your parents will not know where you are, and I don't know if his parents knew where he was, but his parents, I don't think his parents knew. He was denied, his father's a pharmacist, and he was denied medical treatment when he was ill. And when they saw that he was going to die and he had just a couple of days left, they let him go to his house, and he died 2 days later. Now it's easy to say, well, he was hanging out with bad crowd and everything. Well, that is true, but he died because his father really didn't care. That was the real issue, because I used to sit down and talk to him, and talk to a lot of guys, and that's where I learned that, not to judge people solely by their behavior, but you need to understand what's happening with them behind the scenes, why they come to this. And some of these chill boys were very miserable in their home lives, in their family lives, you know. Um, and some people, different children have different emotional or whatever psychological makeup, so they respond to what's going on around them differently. This particular friend of mine, in terms of his personality, in terms of his nature, was better than all his other brothers, and I knew all of them. I preferred him. He was the nicest person of the bunch, but because he wasn't particularly academic, and I think the father just didn't, well, he didn't just, he just sort of kicked him to one side. He wasn't an important child because he wasn't academically brilliant. He wasn't stupid, but he just wasn't, I don't know, an academic child, so to speak, you know. Um, he was a well-spoken chap. He was a nice chap. He was a very nice chap, and away from all the fighting and all that, he was a lovely guy, brilliant guy, lovely guy. But the father just thought that his other children, who were, more intellectual or more academic and progressing in school and getting high grades, they were his children, and the other one was just the other one. And he would say things like that in my presence to the boy's face. I know this because one day I went to have a word with the man, saying that this, you need to pay attention to this guy, and that's when he told me that he has other children who are doing well, so why should he bother with this one who's not doing well anyway? Those were his words to me in front of his son. So sometimes we unknowingly open the door to the enemy to come in and to grab a hold of our children and ruin and wreck their lives. So I would just urge that we're very careful in our approach to raising our children and in the things we say about our children, especially if we have a child who is, in quotes, disadvantaged, or in quotes, not doing well by whatever standard you have measured him. Your children are your children, and I think it's important that you love your children fiercely, and I think it's important that you protect your children, not expose them, so that the enemy doesn't destroy them in the end. And that's all I really want to say as far as my last broadcast goes. So till the next time we see, take care and shalom.